Strong tropical disturbance swirling over Mauritius and still watching Australia on tonight's tropical weather bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical weather bulletin for January 24th. We're code yellow right now for substantial tropical cyclone activity. Angrek is still the strongest storm out there at around 60 miles per hour, maybe a little bit stronger actually at this point, strengthening again after weakening quite a lot earlier on. We've still got that system off the coast of Australia, still not officially named or a tropical cyclone according to BOM, and in the southwest Indian Ocean there's another system that's being followed closely that's nearly a tropical cyclone as well. In the Atlantic, it's 128 days until hurricane season begins. There's a big frontal system over the eastern United States and another one over Texas. 111 days until the East Pacific hurricane season roars into life, and there's a little front there north of the Hawaiian Islands, but generally quiet in the Eastern Pacific zone. Moving on then to the Westpac, and it looks like this. There's some sort of tropical disturbance there in the low latitudes out over the open ocean near Micronesia, the western Micronesian islands, and that probably won't become anything. And in the North Indian Ocean we have very little to talk about there as well. So we still have to call it A5, which is our designation for this system in the Coral Sea. They haven't named it at the Bureau of Meteorology. We still have it down as a tropical storm, and it's still off the coast of Australia. But what we are finding is that it really isn't going according to the script on what we were expecting on the model runs. We'll talk about it later. And a 90% chance here still over Mauritius at this point, delivering some strong winds, but probably not extremely strong like Bilal, but could cause some significant flash flooding issues, and Angrek creeping closer to the southwest Indian Ocean as well. Well, a cyclone warning is in effect for Serena northwards to Ayr along the coast of Queensland, and a cyclone watch further along from Ayr to Innisfail. And it's 348 kilometres from Willis Island right now, 434 from the Whitsundays, 465 from Mackay, 604 from Gladstone, and 625 from Townsville. The storm is still extremely broad, elongated, and possibly not producing enough convection to be considered a tropical storm in the first place. We'll look at it on satellite imagery in a sec. Well, this is Angrek right now, which is starting to look a little bit better on this satellite imagery. It's a fairly compact system. It's pulling further away from the Cocos Keeling Islands, which you can see on the right. And as we look at the different enhancements, it is showing that the convection is starting to bubble up once again as we look closely at that storm. And the little eye feature is sort of there as well. We'll look at it again in a minute. But here is the system near Australia. It's been continuing to move and delay towards the southeast, and slowly, very slowly, it's moving southwesterly at this point. It's been on the charts for so long now, and it just keeps getting pushed back and pushed back, but it will eventually strike the coast of Australia. We are expecting at this point it will be a strong tropical storm with winds of around 110 kilometers per hour sustained. You can still see what's left of that other disturbance over Western Australia as well as we move on to the other imagery of Angrek here. This shows it off a little bit better, a little bit more appreciative of the structure there. The eastern side still needs some building in, but there is half of an eye there, and the convection is blowing up quite nicely on that west and southwestern side. Models are still confident that it will strengthen a little bit more. JTWC are very confident, as a matter of fact. And looking at some more imagery here, this is the Australian system actually that's off the coast of Queensland, and you can see once again its general movement very, very, very slow, maybe southwesterly, but really it's quasi-stationary. A little bit of convection blowing up near it. Is it a full complete circulation? Question marks over that. Does it have enough gales surrounding the storm for the BOM to consider it a storm? No, but it probably does have some tropical storm force winds. Now here's some messy imagery of this other system that's over Mauritius right now, blowing up some convection in those latest frames, and it looks like the centre of the storm, if it has one, is passing directly over Mauritius tonight into the early hours of this morning Wednesday, and it will eventually pass towards the south. The strongest winds are on the eastern side of the storm, so Mauritius shouldn't get the strongest winds, and indeed some models suggesting that they won't even get storm force winds at all, but there are signalled class 2 warnings in effect for Mauritius and class 1 for Rodrigues. Radar from Australia shows you once again the other system moving closer towards the coast there with some interesting radar bands, rain bands on the radar. And this once again is the microwave imagery showing the very decent rotations of both systems on either side, Angrek on the left and what we're calling A5 on the right. Very large influence as well. Similarly, with this one pulling lots of energy in from Africa and northern Madagascar in the southwest Indian Ocean, certainly got a lot of wind behind it, but not very much around the centre of the storm. It's just an extremely broad system. Eastern Pacific sea surface temperatures are still struggling obviously at this time of year. The Atlantic of course is very much subdued as well. The Caribbean still pulling up temperatures of around 28 degrees in a few spots. Western Pacific is still cooling a little bit there as well, only a few areas getting to 29 degrees in the tropical zones there, but still a decent opportunity if any tropical cyclones end up there. North Indian Ocean, it's still looking the best in the eastern Arabian Sea along the west coast of India, where temperatures are still above 30 degrees Celsius. One or two spots as well in the Bay of Bengal, but nothing realistic. Southwest Indian Ocean has very warm water off the coast of western Madagascar, and temperatures are also increasing again after Bilal's passage over Mauritius and Reunion. Temperatures there are around 28 degrees Celsius once again, and around Australia temperatures also increasing slowly along the coast of Western Australia. They're still below average. Gulf of Carpentaria pushing 32 degrees, and the Coral Sea hasn't really suffered very much yet from this current system. South Pacific showing some very high sea surface temperatures there, extremely high actually, 32 degrees plus over Tuvalu downwards towards Fiji, and also towards Vanuatu, temperatures over 30 degrees across the islands. Compared to average, it's the South Pacific that's probably profiting the most at the moment, especially around Fiji. Temperatures around 3 degrees above average there. In the southwest Indian Ocean, it's over the mid-ocean there, which is actually where Angrek is travelling towards, so it's going to benefit from that, absolutely. And around Mauritius and Reunion, those temperatures are only a little bit above average, maybe 1 to 2 degrees. Oceanic heat content is still very prominent in the South Pacific and still decent values in the Coral Sea, although the system that we are tracking is slowly getting towards cooler amounts or lower amounts of energy. Eastern Pacific holding on to 1 or 2 little dregs of energy there, and the Western Pacific still having a decent amount around the Mariana Islands being its centre point, but in general the heat is off at the moment. So let's check the GFS computer models then over the next 5 days. The short range, the big storm on the left then moves through Mauritius and down towards the southeast, possibly reaches hurricane strength. Whether it's actually a tropical cyclone or not by that point is unclear. Angrek just doing its thing, moving along towards the southwest quite slowly as it does so, very relaxed. And off it goes, reaching category 1 status once again. And there's that third system forming behind it as well. We've marked that as a 20% chance in that southwest Indian Ocean. Now this is the system in Australia, of course. There's landfall. We're only looking at about 36 hours until landfall at this point, so really things are, this storm's going to have to get itself sorted very soon if we are going to receive a substantial landfall. Obviously we don't want that, but that's what the models have been saying the whole time. At this point the GFS is calling for maybe 65 or 70 mile per hour winds at landfall and a pressure in the upper 980s. As for rainfall, it is still looking like a significant rainfall event, but once again, the models have toned down this factor too. But we are still looking at substantial rainfall amounts for various areas near the landfall zone, Townsville, and probably towards Ayr, and a few locations near Brisbane as well. The top end of the Cape York Peninsula is looking like there's going to be a very high amount of rainfall there in the next 7 days, up to 19 inches, nearly 500 millimeters. and near the landfall zone of this storm we're looking at up to 200 millimeters of rain and similar amounts across the whole track as it recurves towards the southeast and eventually re-emerges over water somewhere near Brisbane, we think, or maybe a little bit further north. Nonetheless, up to 200 millimeters possible anywhere around this storm's track. Let's check the moderate range then. That's day 5 to 10, and it looks like this. Southwest Indian Ocean, continuation of Angrek, and that second storm forming, and oh look, they're doing a little dance around each other, and that second system becomes the stronger one in the end, absorbs Angrek, and then proceeds southwards. An unlikely scenario, but a possible one. But the good news is all of this happens away from land areas. An interesting look that would be at least a category 1 peak on that second storm at the moment that we're giving 20% on right now. Australian region, what happens next then with the storm out of the way? Does it re-emerge anywhere? Well, no it doesn't. Instead we get a few new ones. Another one in the Coral Sea, one further east, and they both go off towards the east-southeast this time, so we're finally seeing a reprieve, I think, from the Queensland shenanigans, or maybe not, because at the very end of that loop there is another storm forming in the Gulf of Carpentaria, so that's maybe a trio of storms there starting to form. But as we've seen so far with the GFS and other models, they predict all kinds of things, but hardly any of it has come to fruition so far. Scan the barcode and that will take you through to the Force 13 merch store, where you can take a look at all our products as well as our full season and individual storm animations, and are still waiting for Hode t-shirts. We've been waiting so long, it's become a t-shirt fad. In the Scilly range then, we get to see that storm making a quick landfall there in the southern part of the Cape York Peninsula in Queensland, and it eventually dies off completely. And second system trying to form there in the Indian Ocean side, trying to make it over to Western Australia, and it doesn't really make it properly, certainly not convincingly there, but maybe a brief tropical storm. Certainly has a big shelf of storm force winds hugging the coast of Indonesia and East Timor, and then continues eastwards and still getting some breezy winds there, but not a cyclone. Also in the Scilly range, those two other storms parade around the South Pacific Islands. It doesn't look like any of them get any major impacts, although it looks like some of them, Vanuatu and New Caledonia in particular, would get storm force winds if this came to pass. But it's still very long range and big uncertainty about whether we'll see any of this happen. But certainly something to watch out for those South Pacific Islands. The attention may get turned onto you. And nothing in the Northern Hemisphere. Well, back on this day in 2012, it was another old one that we covered on Force 13 back in our very early days. January 24th, 2012, we had Cyclone Funso reaching its peak intensity at Category 4 status over the Mozambique Channel. We didn't do updates at the time, but we did a retrospective animation just like that one. Yes, the individual storm animation concept is that old. In fact, it was pretty much the first thing I ever did on here. And we had Tropical Depression 9S, which would end up forming off the coast of Western Australia. We need a museum. So Angrek is still the strongest storm out there, and the next name, or the first name in the Atlantic this season, is Alberto. In the Eastern Pacific it's Aletta, and in the Central Pacific it is still Hone. 3 storms so far, including the one that we marked in the Coral Sea that the Bureau of Meteorology have never been convinced on so far. Winiar is the next name in the Western Pacific, and Remal is next up in the North Indian Ocean. In the Southern Hemisphere then, in the Australian region, it's still Kirrily that we're waiting for, and we expect it will be named at any time. The Southwest Indian Ocean, their next name is Candice. I'm still not sure whether it will come from that current storm. And the South Pacific's next name is Nat. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.